Hi, it's Jeff Chalmers here from discoverdouble-bass.com, where you can go to learn all about the double bass, whether it's classical music, jazz music, or maybe bluegrass music as well. And today I'm joined by a wonderful bass player, renowned for her own music, but also as an educator and as the teacher in her own online bass school. It's Missy Raines. So Missy, thank you for joining us today. And you teach at Artist Works Academy of Bluegrass?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. How long have you been doing that for?
Since 2011.
Oh,
so
wow.
This is our 10th year, I think. We're celebrating this year.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
That's a big milestone, and that's been amazing that you've built up that community over all of this time, and I imagine that you've taught many students and answered many questions about the bass.
It has been absolutely fabulous. As you, if you're not familiar with the Artist Works platform, one of the elements is that they can video themselves and upload the video and ask me a question or play something for me, and then I do a video that's in direct response to their specific question or their song or whatever. And that's really gratifying because I've worked with students over the years. Like we'll work back and forth, and they may be across the world, but I get to see them on a regular basis and watch their progress, and it's really gratifying.
Oh, that's really exciting, and it's great that you're out there promoting the double bass and bringing education to people who may not be able to access lessons in Nashville in the way that they would do traditionally. So I was hoping today that we could maybe put some of these questions to you, because I shared a social media post saying I'm speaking to an expert educator on bluegrass double bass, and I thought we could maybe discuss these questions that have come in, and hopefully answer some of the more kind of commonly asked ones. So, okay, the first one I have for you, Missy, is: do you have any tips on recognizing chord progressions and learning a piece on the fly? I mean, do you do that on the bandstand, where all of a sudden a tune starts and you're thinking, hang on?
Yeah. Oh, this is such it's a big topic,
Sure.
But I do get this question a lot. One of the things that I like to teach is, and because it really comes down to like ear training and learning your intervals. So if you start to hear, and so that's sort of like the big picture. And some of you may be saying, oh, well, I don't know anything about music and I don't read music and all that. And that's not really what I'm talking about, because you can learn that just by listening to things. And so one trick that you can do is take a song that like a 3-chord song that you know what it is. You know the chords are G, C, and D, and that's like a common progression in bluegrass. And start listening to it, and the key is listening to it differently. So you start recognizing when it goes from, and then you're assigning numbers. Let's fast forward and assign numbers to that. So that's a 1, G is the 1, the C is the 4, and the D is the 5. So you start thinking about those as intervals, and as you listen to that song, when it changes from G to C, think about that interval. Think about that jump from the 1 to the 4 and how big that jump is, that interval, and start to recognize that it's a rather big jump. And then if it changes from the C to the D, well, even the most basic bit of music knowledge will tell you that 4 to the 5 jump is only a whole step away. So it's quite a small jump, and you can hear that interval is just a small interval. So one of the things is to start recognizing when these intervals are bigger jumps and smaller jumps, and then you can start guessing where the chords are going. It may not help you get there before the chord goes, but once it gets there, you can actually start to hear whether this jump has been made from a 1 and made a 4th away, or a 5th away, or even to the 6th minor. And also conversely, when you can start to recognize a 1 to a 2 minor, or a 1 to a 3 minor as being much closer to the root. So really, it's about learning, getting more comfortable with what the root is, and then thinking about, just if you're going to spend any time learning music at all, like just learning a scale, a major scale, and recognizing those intervals, and that's a really great way to start thinking about the big picture of ear training and interval learning. A really quick thing could do, just to do when you're just playing with in a jam session. If you're listening to the guitar player and they're playing say they're in the G position, they might be in another key, but they're using the G finger position, and they might play a 7. That's gonna that note that we don't have a guitar in hand, but that note that's going to sound like it needs to be resolved to another chord, that's going to the 4 chord, and that's a really great tell sign that the music is about to change, and it's probably going to go to that 4 chord.
I think people are further down the line than they realise, because I love the way that you're talking in terms of like the tension of the 5 chord, and you can hear, I always say to my students, it's kind of the difference of sounds. We've got major is happy, minor is sad, 5 has got this kind of energy of wanting to resolve, and if you understand that, you are so far ahead than listening to music for the first time. Everybody knows what a sad song sounds like, or a sad sounding chord, and that tension that you have in the 5. And I really like thinking of with the intervals. You may not be just thinking, is it a larger jump or is it a smaller one, rather than getting too bogged down with thinking I need to know everything. It's like, just am I hearing a larger jump? And the reality is as well that when we learn more, we see all of these patterns, and it's much more likely that the D chord is going to resolve to the G than it would resolve to the A flat. And these patterns will help you and inform you, and the subject will become easier. But taking those first steps, and intervals, of course, making sure that you listen to all of these 2-note patterns that you hear when you hear your doorbell, and it's a major third descending, or whatever the interval may be. You hear 2 notes and you just start to get more comfortable and build it up. It's a huge topic, and I'm sure that we could talk this for long. Why don't we move on to the next question, because I think we could keep going for a long time there, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on a very common question. How do you vary walk-ups and walk-downs? So these runs, I guess, between chords, like, do you have any thoughts on that? I'm sure you must get asked that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, and there's so much you can do. Obviously, a lot of these things are built around scales, and it depends on the kind of feel that you want to have. So say if I'm like in F, and I'm going to go up to from the 1 to the 4, and so that's just a basic, the first 4 notes of a major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4. But if I wanted to, I could change that up by, if I wanted to do a descending run, I could just do the same. But that's going to give it kind of like this sort of maybe a little bit more of a happier feeling than you want. So you could also actually just flatten a little bit when you're coming down. You could create that there's so many variations to that, but that's going to give the song a completely different feel, and may not. You just got to think about what the feel is that you're trying to create, but just varying it with either half steps or whole steps of how you get from one note to the other. It always works to just sort of land a half step below the note that you're going to, but often just that whole step thing can give you a really great feel if it's a minor key. There's lots of options there. What do you do?
I think, I'm just thinking about, I heard the great Steve Bailey talking about this at a masterclass that he was giving, and I don't want to, I'm sure I'm not getting exactly right what he said, but my understanding of what he was saying, that when you're playing these lines and you're moving between chords, if you're playing these scale steps, then it tends to sound quite kind of content and more standard and perhaps a little brighter and more gentle. But all you need, if you want to sound more jazzy, all you need to do is add in the chromatic leading notes, and basically you've got all of a sudden a very different kind of sound world. And I think certainly chromatically, if you're leading from below, that may also be a scale note, but leading from above is more angular, and it just depends on where you are. But yeah, certainly I think there's so many ways, but you need to make sure that whatever you do when you step out, that you land strong, and when the further that you take it and the more grammaticism that you add in, that you actually are able to resolve it, because otherwise you'll be getting the look from the band members as you go a little bit too jazz.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The note choice is really important, but also the timing of,
yes.
If you're doing a really great run, but it's not in time for whatever into whatever it is you're doing, it's not going to sit well. I mean, it's gonna ruin the groove.
And choosing your moment as well in the ensemble. What are people doing? Is there space for me to move up? In a tasteful way.
That's a huge one. Listening while listening and finding that place. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things is that taking a recording like one of your favorite artists and really listening to the song and thinking, when are they actually doing it? How often is this? And then how often am I doing it? And is it, every few moments, and then it's becoming too much. Okay, another question that came in from the audience, Missy, was, of course, playing in a two-feel. We've got these kind of typical, Route 5 kind of bass lines. And if you have any tips on how to play them in a more traditional bluegrass kind of style. And I think the question followed on to be talking about, are we having kind of long held notes or shorter notes when it's this kind of dum dum sort of feel? Your typical kind of 1/5 bass lines. What thoughts do you have?
Well, and this is pretty subjective, but ground, I think. But I definitely think that when you're playing cutting the note off a little shorter, it's going, especially within bluegrass, I think it allows for more space, obviously. That's going to be the thing that happens, but it's going to allow for more space and because there's so much happening. There's that rolling, if you're playing with banjo, there's the rolling of the banjo, there's the guitar, there's the fiddle, drones, there's mandolin chop. So those shorter notes are going to really punch through, I think, a little bit stronger than a more like a longer held out note. But I do think it's important to still, you've got to maintain the tempo of the song. The note still has to have its full value. So you want it to sort of last as long as it absolutely needs to, but then make sure it has this finite, end to it. So there is that space just before the next note, which gives the whole. You want to create bluegrass. Bluegrass at its best, I think, has this bounce to it.
Yes, that's what people are looking for.
Yeah,
that word a few times.
Yeah, it has a bounce, and that bounce is it's a bit of the holy grail. So that you're trying to create, because you can have bounce does not mean fast or speedy. It just means bounce.
Yeah.
So it's just where we place that note and where we stop it, and it's just something that you just continually work on. I know there's folks, like if you watch video of Roy Huskey Jr. or something, the way he plays a lot and moves his hand just sort of comes out into the air, and then he comes back to do it. And there's it seems like a lot of some pomp and circumstance going on with his hand, and but I think that has a lot to do with him actually just ingesting the time in between when he's going to play the next note. It's
part of a circle, isn't it? It's part of you're articulating the offbeat. And so is there a tiny bit of daylight then in a sort of typical two-feel? I know that you may have a much shorter attack in a more kind of rhythmic, kind of sense, but when you're playing a more connected way, does there generally tend to be a bit of daylight between the two notes, or you don't completely connect them to give that a little bit of a feel of momentum and maybe highlighting the next note.
I think so. I think that little bit of daylight is a really great way to put it. That it exists there for that certain kind of bounce.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the only way to of course play on a song. I've played with a lot of different artists, and there have been lots of different artists and styles that I've played with within the bluegrass genre, where I don't think that would have felt as good as letting the note linger just a little bit longer. But that little bit of daylight punch thing that creates that bounce is definitely a sound, and it's when you're going after that particular bluegrass bounce, that's the way to do it.
I love it. I've been really. I mean, you just talk about root and a fifth feel, but I've been listening so carefully to all of these different players and enjoying, kind of thinking, just trying to emulate their sound, and I think it's a really wonderful thing to spend your time doing.
It is.
We've got another bit of a shorter question, but in terms of playing roots and fifths, what note choice would be suitable if you're playing a root and fifth pattern if the fifth is the same note as the root of the following chord?
Mm-hmm.
Have you?
Yeah, I mean, the really obvious choice is just to stay on the one, just if you're playing in A and instead of announcing that E beforehand, just play two A's.
Yeah.
But you can also
you could lead down.
You could lead down to it. You could that's a kind of an odd choice, but there's lots of choices. But what my go-to would be to stay on the one or lead down to it.
That was my thoughts, because it depends on the context, doesn't it, really? But you're right. I think that you're announcing, as you said, the next chord. It can. It could be confusing and sound like you're arriving, early.
Well, it's confusing, but it takes away the dynamic. It takes away the power of the song.
Yes.
Sometimes.
Yes, because of that movement is so key, isn't it? And if you're the person that then just arrives early and spoils the surprise, or not the surprise, but the destination.
The impact sometimes the impact of that chord can be really powerful. However, I have had a few times. Of course, I can't think of a song to demonstrate. There are one or two instances where going to that five beforehand doesn't affect. And in fact, it actually blends better with the melody that's happening at the time than to stay on the one. There's a few little rare cases where that. And so really, what I mean by even bringing that up is that it's always about listening. It's always about listening to what's happening. Note choices for the bass player are about what can I do that will cause no harm to what else is happening at the time. So there's so much else. If you think about all the layers, there's this, the singer, there's, all these other things, and the bass is down here, and we have one note.
And you want to move in the same direction,
suddenly, you want it to be the most supportive, honest note that you can choose. So that's always, you have to be thinking and listening to what's happening, so that whatever note you choose doesn't conflict or take away from what's happening. So the same example, if you're playing like a 3 over the 1 as up to the 4, as just a one note, like just playing actually playing 2-3 notes over that one chord. That's a beautiful thing, but it doesn't always work. It just depends on the song.
Yeah, people need to always serve the music and try to remember that. And I think maybe, Missy, just to finish off, I had a question for you, which is, you've obviously taught numerous students and had many people come to you with questions about bluegrass, but what are the most common questions that you think that people come to you, with? What are the kind of, or maybe the common issues and topics that, come up again and again in the teaching studio?
So there's a lot of them, but I think the thing that I actually see the most with students is is actually something that I've been working on lately. I've been doing some different workshops, and is the physicality of the bass, and actually watching students become more comfortable with the instrument and how they hold it, and just being able to utilize their like an open hand situation versus sort of going after it with the you know, I call the bluegrass club or whatever you want to call that.
The baseball bat.
Which is exactly how I learned to play for years and years and years. And that's what I did until I actually then learned to do this, to open up my hand. But I think the physicality of just becoming more comfortable, how they stand with the bass. I have a lot of students who might be sort of standing out like this away from the instrument, and it's like they're not allowing the instrument to become, they're seeing it as this huge thing that they have to overcome, instead of kind of allowing it to come into their body and sort of wrap their arms around it and get comfortable with how they hold it, and also learn to use the resistance of their body, the weight of their arms to get this sound, instead of standing away from it and squeezing. Because that's going to fatigue your muscles. And
it absolutely. The way that the use of arm and hand weight and your natural posture and bringing the instrument to you. I do find it exactly what you're saying, that people often stand with the bass further away from them, and the more it is, you know, the further away and the more vertical, the harder it is for you to use arm weight. Whereas if you're just naturally bringing yourself back like this, and in your right hand as well, and keeping loose, keeping comfortable.
Keeping loose and keeping comfortable. That's the thing that I see the most in my students, and so they may not know to ask about it, but that's what I love about having a chance to see them in video, because I can see what they're doing and how they're playing, and so I can. That's the thing that I try to get them to be aware of the most, is bringing the bass to them and not be afraid of it. You know, it's kind of a big instrument. You know, regardless of what your size is, and we think of we have to pull these huge strings and all that. So.
And I think often the benefit of seeing somebody is that you may have a student who's coming to you saying that I'm having problems playing in tune, and it's my left hand, but actually the problem is the fact that the bass is too far away from them, and they need to, and they come back, and all of a sudden the hand shape's there.
Everything works. It falls into place.
I see. Well, that is great advice, and I think it's certainly something that I've thought about with my own playing and advised students about over the years as well. So, Missy, thank you so much for joining me. It's been great to come out and spend time over in Nashville. I've had an incredible trip and feel like I've learned so much about the bass, and it's just been a joy to hear you in person and to meet you and to hang out and to talk about the instrument. Just before we wrap up, where can people go to learn more with you? Because they can actually take lessons from you over the internet now. So what's the situation there? You can go to artistworks.com and /Missy Raines, or just artistworks.com. You can also go to my website, missyraines.com. That's fantastic. So I'd certainly advise everybody to go check out that, and check out Missy's music as well. Royal Traveller is the most recent album, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll all be on the road a bit more. People might even be able to see you in person. Let's keep our fingers crossed for that one. And thank you so much for watching at home. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. If you want to learn more about the double bass, view more conversations like this, please go and check out our website, discoverdoublebass.com. Thanks, Missy, and we'll see you all next time.